Hello, everyone. Welcome to Northpointe Plus. This is our podcast that follows the Sermon on Sunday. I'm Sylvia Jarvis. This is Rick Rubel.
You seem a little distracted today.
I'm a little off my game. This is our second go-around try at this podcast thing. So, episode 115. So, we've been doing this for a while now.
Yeah.
You'd think we'd be experts, but yet
You would
here
think,
we are.
Yes. Actually, a little behind-the-scenes look. We made it through about the first 7 minutes of the podcast and realized it was not recording.
Yeah.
So this is the first ever second take of Northpointe Plus.
But we'll give you the highlights of what we were
That's
just
right.
talking about.
That's right.
Rick, what are your thoughts on Silver Bells? Silver Bells in the City.
I love the song. It's a great song. I actually
Just not the event.
I've not been to the event. We've lived here now 9 Christmases, and this is our 10th Christmas, I guess. And we've never been down for it. We just have not done it. So.
And I try to go every year. I've definitely missed some, but my husband and I, one of our first dates was actually to Silver Bells.
Oh, nice.
Yep. And
so that's why you go.
Well,
it's romantic.
Now I go. It's funny. Now I go with my sister-in-law every year because she is always like, "Do you want to go?" And I'm like, "Sure." And Jake is always working now.
Oh,
so it's funny. So her and I get to go.
But you have a favorite float?
I do have a favorite float. It's the Petoskey Steel Drum Band, and I think it's not just my favorite float. I think it's pretty much everybody.
All of Lansing's.
But a little insider for you. People from Petoskey don't always love the steel drum band.
Oh, wow.
Yep. My sister's boyfriend is from Petoskey, and he doesn't like that float. And I said, it's because you're jealous, because they're so cool, because I like to pick on him. But it's a very cool float, I think so. But yeah. So you spoke on Sunday.
I did.
Can you give us a little recap of what
Sure.
you spoke about?
We finished the Blueprints series on Sunday, and really kind of did a just a flyby of Acts 9, 10, 11, and 12, and then really kind of focused on Acts 13 and 14, which is still a really long passage to try and go through. But basically, as we've talked through this series, we've talked about the church in the New Testament, specifically in the book of Acts, and the patterns, the model that it creates for us in terms of us evaluating what we do, where we are, how we do it, and taking a look at the blueprint that's there to try and model that. And the heart of the message really was, as a church, a healthy church reproduces. A healthy church multiplies. And so we looked at Paul's first missionary journey, and really the big takeaway is that we've got to be involved in planting churches. And the cool part of that was that we are at Northpointe. We are. I don't know what you thought at the end, but I shared really in the last 8 years we've helped either plant or replant 7 different churches, and that's kind of a cool thing. And I thought the highlight of the service really was the video from Mohi from the Kamaus, just showing us what has happened with the church that we helped plant in Shumani, Kenya.
And I think that, and this could just be me, sometimes we forget that we help do all those things, because I'm like, oh yeah, you started saying some, and I was like, I remember that.
Yeah.
And so it's just cool to be able to look back at that, and especially with all the Mohi stuff now that we're doing our special Christmas offering again this year.
Yeah.
For Mohi, it's just cool to see that video, because it puts it it's kind of the same putting a face to the name kind of deal. I'm putting a image in my head of oh, that's the building. That is the school or the church that we built. It's just, I think that's nice.
Yeah, it's not just writing a check or doing an electronic gift. It really is thinking, I've watched that video probably now maybe 10 times, and I just keep seeing those little boys sitting in front of the church. Oh my gosh,
yes.
And that little girl in the dress,
tutu, yeah.
that's dancing kind of along with the ladies. But it is. I can't wait to go back this summer and see the building and the people, and in talking to the people from Mohi, the difference that church has made in that community is just dynamic. It's transformative because it was a community with no school, no church, no presence of Jesus except for Angazi camp that Mohi helped start. That's about maybe a couple 3 kilometers away, and the backstory of the planting of the church was that the people from Mohi came in to help build the camp. And they hired contractors, but they hired a lot of the people in the community to help them too. And so they're watching, and every day the Mohi people would start with devotions and talking about Jesus. And when they got to the place that the buildings were built, the people in the community said, "Can't we still do this?" And when Jake and I were there last year, we met Pastor Dan, that is the pastor of the church. And at that point, he was just walking from house to house to talk to people about Jesus. So they were just starting to gather, and it was just a few people. And so now the fact that they've got somewhere between 300 and 500 people, counting the kids, that are coming to worship is really, really cool.
It is really cool. That video, too, every time I've seen it, I've only seen it a couple times, but I feel like I see something different every time where I'm just like, oh my gosh, those little kids are just so dang cute.
Yep.
But so let's jump into some of our questions. Our first question though mentions Rooted, and Rooted is the study that we've been doing as a church, but the life groups have been doing it. So it's not like everybody's been doing it, but a good majority of people have. Do you have anything you wanted to say about Rooted?
Yeah, we probably had somewhere between 125 and 150 people involved in life groups that were working through Rooted. And Rooted is all about 7 rhythms that are a part of the life of a follower of Jesus, and so it's all about prayer. It's about service. It's about community. It's about what else did we giving? A lot of those rhythms, worship, that are part of that. Last night or Sunday night, we had a celebration for the end of Rooted and had, I don't know, over 100, maybe 125 people who were there for that. That was just fantastic as people shared stories about how they had taken steps in their relationship with God and how God had worked through that. It was really, really cool. That was separate from what we've done on Sunday morning, but it's been kind of fun to see how things often dovetailed in terms of what was going on in our Rooted groups and what was coming out of the book of Acts. It was not, it was intentional, but not. We did the series, the Blueprint series, independently of Rooted, but recognizing that they would probably cross paths some.
Yeah, I was there, and I think the cool thing about Rooted is that we were all doing it. So all the life groups were doing it, but we were really just doing it the whole time with our life group, and then to be at the event where we're all talking about our own experiences, but some of them are similar, but some of them are very different. I don't know. It was just a cool sense of community to be able to sit there and talk with everybody, how we all just did this huge study together and how fun it was. But then also just to hear everybody's stories individually. We kind of, did open mic about just what, and I had a cool story to tell. I feel like so many people had stories to come out of this where I was like, wow, this is so cool. And my thought was, this would be so cool, to share on Sunday morning. But it's just hard because it's that was our community. We all got it because we all did it. And so I don't know. I feel much more confident telling people or encouraging people to be you should do Rooted. Yeah. Rooted is a lot of fun.
And if you're not a part of a life group, what our plan is from this point forward, when we launch new life groups, that will be the first study that we do to start the group, because it really does create a sense of community, and it helps people get to know each other, and it helps people really kind of have a foundation in terms of recognizing how God's working in their life and responding to them. So good stuff.
Yeah. So our first question is, when I fasted from food during Rooted, I got sick. Is it okay to fast from something else when I'm fasting and praying to hear from the Holy Spirit? Because fasting was part of the Rooted.
Yeah, it was part of what we talked about in terms of the rhythms. Yeah, with prayer, it absolutely is okay to fast from whatever. The whole concept of fasting is that we we limit or eliminate some aspect of our life that takes up some sense of time, energy, focus, and instead put that time, energy, and focus on God. So typically when somebody fasts, oftentimes during the time that they would normally be eating, they're going to spend that time in prayer, or talking to God, listening to God, whatever that is. And so if someone fasts from something other than food, like if you fast from a TV show or from TV or from your phone or whatever it is, the concept is that you would stop doing that and instead have your focus be on God during that time and for listening to it.
Right?
Yeah, it's a sacrifice, and it what it does is it's Paul talks about not letting our bodies control us. But placing controls on our body for the glory of God. And so there's something, I think there's a battle that happens when you fast from food and anything that is of value to you. And so when you give that up, God does some pretty incredible things. So I would say to anybody who's thinking about fasting, it's a great, great thing to do. Figure out what that is. I would encourage people, challenge people to fast from food, because I think when you fast from food, your body screams at you, and it really is a battle, and it becomes a spiritual battle over, is my flesh in charge or is my spirit in charge? If you get sick, I would say, obviously, if you've got something wrong in your body and you can't fast, don't beat yourself up about that. If you're going to fast more than for a meal or two or a day or two or whatever, talk to your doctor. Do that. Don't hurt your body to do that. But a lot of times our body rebels because we're just used to feeding it all the time.
Yeah, I was going to say, I know in our group we talked about like getting hangry and like who are the people who get hangry and just need a snack and all that. And so it really does, like, it's just crazy how it's one of those things you take for granted. And I think that's how I looked at it, is those things that I take for granted. Yeah. And mostly like a sacrifice, like being on my phone. Like if I'm on my phone that much, it's like, okay, what if I replaced this? Imagine what would happen. So. Yeah. But yeah, so our second question, Herod the Great rebuilds the temple and the city of Caesarea, where the amphitheater is. Herod talks to the wise men and kills all the babies when Jesus is born. Herod executes James and is ready to kill Peter. Herod gets eaten by worms. Are they all the same guy?
There's lots of a Herod movement in the New Testament. There's there's at least 5 different Herods that are there. So it's a great question in terms of just trying to keep track of everybody. Yeah. Herod the Great, I've talked a lot about Herod the Great because when I went to Israel, he came to life for me. He was a massive builder, and he had a monumental ego. So he built all kinds of stuff so that people would remember him, which is why he's called Herod the Great. And the city of Caesarea Maritime, this Caesarea that's on the Mediterranean Sea, he really built the port and built most of the city to be a little place for Caesar to come, to leave Rome, come to the area and be right on the water. It's a really cool place. A lot of times, if you'll look, and not so much in Italy, but if you see archaeological pictures of aqueducts that have water in the background, that's at Caesarea. They developed an aqueduct system and would take water and take it throughout the land, which is kind of crazy. Anyway, I showed the picture of the amphitheater because it was a powerful moment for me in Israel to think that's probably where Herod, not Herod the Great, but Herod Herod the Tetrarch that's mentioned in 13 and 14. Where he was eaten of worms and died.
Did you take that picture, or did you find that picture?
I have a picture just like that, but I ripped it off the internet because something happened to my Israel pictures, and I can't find them, which is
But that's cool that you went there, because Jamie has been there now too, and I am so jealous of that trip because everybody always comes back saying that they loved it.
It's pretty incredible. So anyway, Herod the Great built all kinds of stuff. Herod the Great is the one who rebuilt the temple, Solomon's temple. So the temple that existed in the time of Jesus, Herod the Great built. He died. Herod the Great was the Herod that tried to kill baby Jesus.
Okay.
So that all happens. He dies about, I don't know, right around 4 BC, 2 BC, somewhere in there. Herod the Tetrarch, that we talked about in Herod, who's sometimes called Herod Antipas. He's the Herod in this particular passage that we looked at. Jesus called him Herod the Fox. Actually, I messed up my story. I'm going to talk about 4 different Herods. Herod Antipas, Herod the Tetrarch, is who executes John the Baptist.
Okay.
He's the guy who divorced his wife, married his half-brother's wife. John the Baptist said, man, you're not doing you're not honoring God. You ought not do this. Because Herod's the king of Judea. He's working with the Jews. And Herodias, Herod's wife, her daughter dances for Herod. Herod's enthralled with Salome. And Herod says, ask anything you want, and I'll give it to you, up to have my kingdom. And Herodias says, ask for John the Baptist's head. And he executes John the Baptist. That's Herod the Tetrarch, or Herod Antipas. That's the Herod who was in charge when Jesus was on trial. So Jesus goes on trial with Pilate. Pilate sends him to Herod. Herod sends him back to Pilate, and Jesus is executed. Herod Agrippa, who is the Herod that is in Acts 13 and 14, he's the grandson of Herod the Great, and he's the guy who executes James, Peter, James, and John, one of the apostles, the first apostle to be martyred, and he's then the guy who, when Peter escapes prison by the power of God supernaturally, the angel comes and releases him from prison. Herod cuts out and goes to Caesarea, gives a big speech, probably in the amphitheater, and the people say, "Oh, this guy is incredible. This is the voice of a God, not of a man." And Herod says, "Yeah, I am.
You know what? Yeah."
and God says, "Not so much." And he dies right there. And he was eaten of worms and died. Love it, love it, love it. Just fun. So that's Herod Agrippa 1. Then if you get to the end of Acts 25, Acts 26, Herod Agrippa 2, his son, is mentioned there. And that's the Herod that then Paul is defending himself because Paul has been charged. Charges have been brought against Paul, and Paul defends himself to Herod Agrippa 2. And that's the guy who says, you know what, Paul, you've almost persuaded me to become a Christian. But because you appealed to Caesar, you're going to Rome. He would have released him, which is just kind of interesting. Anyway, that's 4 different Herods that are there.
So why doesn't the Bible, I was thinking this, why doesn't the Bible write that every time? But then is it because we should just know the time periods and the heritage?
Well, when they would have written it, everybody would have known. It's like,
right, that's what I was.
It's like saying, oh yeah, George Bush, he was president after 9/11.
Right.
And we know, oh, that's 43. That's not 41. That's not George Herbert Walker Bush.
Yeah.
It's, which
I get
it's not, yeah. So they would have known. And when you look at historians like Josephus, they help paint the picture of who everybody is. But they are. I mean, it doesn't say Herod the Great. It doesn't use Herod the Great because at that point in time, it was just Herod.
Yeah.
Herod the Tetrarch, which means Herod the ruler, or Herod Antipas, was kind of like, Herod was a title as much as, it was more of a title than a name. It's kind of like king, kind of a deal. So it calls him Herod Antipas or Herod the Tetrarch in the New Testament. Herod Agrippa is who's mentioned in 12, 13, 12. Acts chapter 12, and then when it gets to Acts 25, it says Herod Agrippa again. Yeah.
I just think that's a good reminder, though, because, like, I mean, even today, we have multiple people named Jake or Jacob, and we have multiple people have the same names. But I just think that that's a good reminder, and to see, like, it's just the lineage right there.
Yeah.
Like, I think that stuff's interesting.
Yeah.
And it just helps me remember, like, no, this was a lot of time passing. Like,
Yeah.
because if it just says Herod, and I think a lot of people just think Herod, and what the question was, like, says all these things, but it's people.
Yeah. And again, I would say part of what's cool in this is real people, real place. This is not fiction, and historians, non-biblical historians, affirm the lives of these people and their stories.
Yep.
Yeah.
I do think that is cool. So our next question here. Doesn't God sometimes call us to do things out of our character or outside of our comfort zone?
Yeah, this is a great question, and it comes out of a section in the message where I talked about that it was just really interesting that the leaders at the church in Antioch, so Simeon, Manaen, Lucius, Saul, Barnabas, all of them they're worshiping, they're praying, and in the midst of that time, as they pray and fast, they say, "Hey, we need to send Saul and Barnabas on this missionary journey. We need to send them to do what God has called them to do." And as I studied and looked at that, I thought, okay, why those guys and not the others? Mm-hmm. I think the Holy Spirit prompted that, but the thing that they were called to do was consistent with God's character. It was consistent with what Jesus had told them to do, and I think that it was consistent with their gifting. Mm-hmm. That if you think about who would you want to go on a journey to tell people about Jesus, you'd want somebody who's like warm and fuzzy, encourager, and you'd want somebody who was bold and direct and was able to not argue, but who was able to state a case
and defend
and defend. Yeah. And so I think that they were equipped incredibly to be able to do that, and that was consistent with their character as well. So I said in the message, I think
steps,
if what's that?
You had steps in the message, like praying before taking.
Those four things in terms of seeking God, and saying, is it consistent with God's character? Is it consistent with what the New Testament teaches? And is it consistent with my gifting, ability, passion, those things as well? The question really is, does God only work in that? And I think no, but I think that that's a good filter for us to use when we feel like we're called to do something. So, I'm trying to think of some aspect, like if God called me to go preach in southern Louisiana, I'd certainly be open to that, but it'd be like, man, I don't understand that culture at all. And maybe if it was outside the country someplace, I don't know the language. I don't, it's a completely different environment than I've ever grown up. I'm going to have a lot of struggles. Sometimes God does call us to do that. He calls us to serve outside of our gifting, but oftentimes I think that He equips us and prepares us to serve, to respond to His calling with ways that He has prepared us in the past, so that we're ideally suited to go do what He has called us to do.
Yeah, I'm glad you expanded on that, because I guess as I was sitting there on Sunday, just me personally, I was thinking, like, do I take all these steps every time I have to make a decision? But I like how you said it's like when you feel prompted or you feel like you're being called somewhere, and it is stretching the boundary of, like, oh my gosh, like you're kind of freaking out maybe. Like you're like, I don't know if I should be doing this, and then go into those steps. I like.
And I think at some level, it was in retrospect, I think that we can look back and say, oh, they were ideally suited to do this ministry. And sometimes we're not even aware of how God has prepared us. It's I can remember having a conversation with somebody at one point, and they had changed their major in college. And felt like, you know what, I wasted 2.5 years being a biology major, and now I'm doing ministry. That doesn't make any sense at all. Until 10 years in the future, when people that they were reaching were medical people that worked in research and development in biology, and it was like, oh yeah, he could talk to them.
Yep.
God had prepared him to be in that place at that point in time with what had happened 10 years before that.
Yeah. I like stories like that.
Yeah.
So another question we had, correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought I heard you say Northpointe isn't here for you, it's here for your neighbors. Should I keep coming then? I thought the church was meant to train and equip me to go take Jesus to my neighbors. Is that not the case?
I love the question. Yes, you should keep coming.
Yes.
The point I was trying to make is that the church doesn't exist so that we can come say, oh, this is a great place, and hoard it.
Or come for just the sake of coming.
Yeah.
So that's what I do on Sundays.
Yep,
go to church.
it's a part of my normal life stuff. I think that it's very easy for us to forget that that the church is the hope of the world, that God designed the church to be a body so that people who were far from him could come to know him. And so when we come together, it is to worship God. It really is to give our best to God, but it's also to collectively figure out how we can communicate the gospel to people who don't know Jesus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I don't know, that question is interesting too, because yes, we are supposed to train and equip, and I feel like when I come to church, I am learning. I'm learning new things all the time, and it could be on something that I've heard a bunch of times, and if something sparks an interest or whatever. But right now the church isn't always viewed in the best light. Just in general. And so I think that that's a better way to look at it. When we say that the church is a hospital, that
right.
kind of,
for broken
that mindset,
people. Yep.
That's what that statement is from.
Yeah. It's probably been about 5 years ago that we went to Ukraine, to be with Herb and Kim and to help, to do a mission trip there. And so I'd been at Northpointe for about 5 years, and they asked me, the guy who was supposed to speak for a missions conference that was there got delayed by plane, whatever. And so at 3 or 4 in the afternoon, Herb said, "Any chance that you could preach tonight?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." And so we're in the van. I mean, he got the word when we stopped for gas someplace. And so I spent the next hour just thinking, praying, okay, God, we were actually towards the end of the Esther series. And I loved preaching from Esther, and I ended up being able to modify some things. But in the midst of that, when I was preaching, as a part of that message, I remember talking about the mission of Northpointe, helping all people move towards a life fully devoted to Jesus. And I had been saying that for 5 years, but I don't know that I had, and until that particular message, it was oh, daggone, helping all people, that's evangelism. Mm-hmm. Move towards a life fully devoted to Jesus, that's discipleship. So our mission really is evangelism, it's outreach, and discipleship. It's both and, not one or the other. And so it's easy for a church to be sold out completely on evangelism and reach a lot of people, and people don't grow. Mm-hmm. And it's really easy for a church to say, oh no, we're all going to grow. We're all going to dive into deep, deep Bible study and have so much heavenly knowledge that they're no earthly good. But our mission, our call is it's both evangelism and discipleship.
Yeah. Yeah. So last question, anything that you couldn't fit into the message?
Yeah, I felt bad. I didn't say it second service, but I said it first. That I had about 10 more minutes that I want to go. And part of what I really wanted to share when we talk about church planting and talk about how Northpointe has been involved, that's great. But I think it's easy for anybody who was here to think, oh yeah, we do that as a church. We are involved in church planting. I give my money, and that helps plant a church. And part of what I wanted to tell was a story about a guy who became a friend I met about 20 years ago. His name's Dave Nelson. And he was on staff. I think he was a campus pastor at Kensington Church outside Detroit. At that point in time, I was on staff at New Life Christian Church. I was campus pastor there in Centerville, Virginia, and Kensington Church and New Life and Forefront Church in Virginia Beach, and I can't remember the name of the other church that was in San Antonio. The four of our churches together, the reason I met Dave was because the four of our churches joined forces and finances to plant a church south of Detroit in Warren, Michigan. Paradox Church is the name of the church. They're still going strong. Really cool thing. And I really liked Dave. I just enjoyed being with him in all the conversations that we had about planting this church. It was a really unique thing because we had three different kind of tribal backgrounds, even though we were all kind of independent, non-denominational churches. We all had different theological perspectives. And so having churches with different theology join together to plant a church, it's like, okay, what theology is going to win here? So it just was a really cool thing. Great time with Dave. But at that point in time, Dave he just kind of had a dream a little bit. And the next year, he and his family moved to plant a church in Salt Lake City, Utah. Not a lot of Christians in Salt Lake City, a whole lot of Mormons. And the thing that was just astounding to me was Dave and his wife communicated the vision of what they were going to do in Salt Lake City at Kensington and with their friends and family and all that kind of stuff. And 30 adults moved from Detroit to Salt Lake City to help plant this church.
Wow.
They're not on staff. They weren't being paid. They quit their jobs, sold their houses, and they moved to Salt Lake to plant a church.
Wow.
That's pretty incredible. So it was about 60 people, 30 adults and kids. Dave and his wife. The church has a fun name. It's K2, the church. Salt Lake City Mountains. They're from Kensington. K2, the church. Yeah, it's a cool thing, and it's a church now of I think more than 2,000. Just committed to following Jesus. Dave's still the pastor there. Really, really cool deal in terms of how God has worked through the church to impact the area. And I remember this, again, 20 years ago, thinking that's pretty incredible that people would choose to start a new life, like the pioneers, in the mid 1800s, to start a new life for the purpose of the gospel. That's just pretty incredible. So then fast forward a few years past that, and New Life, the church I was part of at that point in time, was deeply committed to planting churches. I could talk a ton about the stuff that we did there, how we did it, and the impact that church has had. That church has probably been involved. I said our 7 and 8 years. That's woo. New Life has probably helped plant. I think I've seen a number at some point in time that it's probably close to 400 churches.
Wow.
But one of our guys on staff from Centerville, Virginia, so outside Washington, D.C., was called to plant a church in Cleveland, Ohio. And we had a group of people from New Life that did the exact same thing, sold their houses, quit their jobs, and moved to Cleveland. Who moves to Cleveland to plant a church? I say that, being a guy from Ohio, but it's like, why would you go to Cleveland? And some of them were our good friends. Stan and Heidi. I had baptized Heidi, and I knew I wasn't going to have time to tell this story, but we're doing okay. I'm gonna tell this story anyway. Heidi, my friend Heidi, she had come to church just really broken, in need, and God had touched her life. I had a chance to baptize her, and her husband was a math teacher in the high school. The guy who ultimately moved to plant the church in Cleveland, his wife was a math teacher at the same high school, and she had been praying for Heidi's husband, Stan, and didn't know Heidi. So I met Heidi because I was campus pastor, and so he had a lot of chance to talk, that kind of thing, and it just was a really, really cool thing that God was working. Shannon was praying for Stan, but Heidi came to Jesus, and so we became good friends with them. And I remember we were together eating dinner one night, and Stan was absolutely a skeptic, agnostic, atheist, whatever, didn't want any part of God's stuff. But God was doing some stuff, and so I just said to Stan one night, I said, "Hey, Stan, how are you doing spiritually? What's going on spiritually in your life?" And he said, "I'm good. Rick, how are you doing spiritually?" And I went, "Well, let me tell you." It was he was so proud of himself because it was like he turned the tables to go to me. And it's been a few years since we were together, but he still tells that story. Yeah, I said, "Do you remember that night?" "Oh yeah, I remember that night." Anyway, Stan and Heidi moved to Cleveland to help plant the church, and just a really, really cool thing. That church in Cleveland is doing great. Later, we had another staff person that went to plant a church in Fredericksburg, Virginia, about, 60 miles away, 100 miles away. And we had another group of people from the church sell their homes, leave their stuff, and go help plant with them. That I wanted to tell those stories because, like, we think about church planters and we think, oh yeah, Saul and Barnabas, they went on this trip. That's really cool. I could never do that. Mm-hmm. And I think that it's really helpful to think, no, God still calls people to do crazy things like that today.
Yeah.
And if God is tugging at your heart to do something crazy, don't discount that and say, oh, that doesn't make any sense. Because following Jesus doesn't necessarily make any sense, in the way that the world thinks. And so that's part of what I wanted to share yesterday.
Yeah, and I think, too, it kind of goes along with a lot of things where everybody's telling you that, like, you're crazy for doing those kinds of things.
Yep.
Or maybe wanting to go to Kenya. People think that you're crazy, or wanting to go to Sri Lanka. They're like, why would you want to do that?
Yeah.
But when you're just so at peace because you're like, well, I'm been talking to God about this and we seem like we're on the same page. So like, I feel, confident, peaceful, whatever. But it's as long as you're doing those steps that we talked about earlier and like making sure that this is a calling from God, then hey,
if he's in it,
answer it.
Nothing else matters. Yep. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Rick, for chatting with me twice today.
Yeah. One last thing. It's funny because I don't know that I've ever really done this, but I want to plug this Sunday's service. It's the Sunday after Thanksgiving, and typically here, different from some other places that I've been where, like the Sunday after Thanksgiving, nobody was there because everybody had traveled. Here, that typically has been been a pretty good Sunday for us because people have family close. But this Sunday's message, I think, I really want you to hear it because there's a very direct challenge in terms of action to take, and there's going to be another really cool thing in the service.
No spoilers.
I'll just say we're going to tell a story about God working supernaturally that you're going to want to hear, I think. Yeah.
I think it'll be a good Sunday.
Yeah.
But, well, yes. So thank you again. If you guys would like, share, subscribe, all that stuff, send this to a friend. Maybe you don't want to hear us babble though. But yeah, thanks guys. And we will hopefully see you on Sunday.